Chapter 1, The Pink Slip Loophole. The air in the executive suite of Sterling Vance Tech always smelled of expensive ozone and arrogance. It was a Tuesday morning, 8:02 a.m. I was 3 minutes into my second cup of black coffee when my door opened without a knock. Julian Sterling, our CEO, stood there. He didn't sit. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply tossed a manila folder onto my desk. Julian was 42, wore tailored suits that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and operated under the delusion that disruption was a synonym for immunity.
"We're moving in a different direction, Elias," Julian said, his voice carrying that practiced, casual cruelty he'd learned at a mid-tier MBA program. "The board and I feel that the COO role needs a more agile mindset, someone who isn't weighed down by the legacy ways of doing things."
I didn't blink, I didn't lean back. I reached for the folder, opened it, and read the first page. It wasn't just a termination notice. It was a termination for cause. "This cites a violation of Section 8.2 of the Employee Handbook," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone.
"Unauthorized use of personal hardware for proprietary data storage. That's a bold claim, Julian. We did a sweep of the server logs last night," Julian smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "You accessed the M&A database from a non-company MAC address at 11:45 p.m. on Sunday. That's gross misconduct, which means no severance, no stock vesting, and a very uncomfortable conversation with your next employer." The loophole was transparent. Sterling Vance was currently being courted by Bridgepoint Equity. A $400 million buyout was on the table.
My severance package, negotiated when I helped found the operational side of this company with Clara Vance, was worth $2.5 million in cash and nearly $5 million in accelerated stock. By firing me for cause just weeks before the buyout closed, Julian was attempting to scrape $7.5 million off the company's liabilities. To pad his own exit bonus, he expected me to shout. He expected me to plead. He probably expected me to threaten to sue him for age discrimination, a move he had a pre-written press release ready to counter. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It had been recording from the moment his shadow crossed my threshold. I placed it on the desk, the waveform showing his every word in crisp digital clarity. "I see," I said. "Are you aware that the MAC address in question belongs to the encrypted terminal Clara Vance installed in the secure off-site lab?"
"A terminal I have written authorization to use for emergency system audits." Julian's smirk faltered for a microsecond before his hubris reasserted itself. "That authorization was revoked in the last board meeting. You must have missed the memo."
"Security is waiting downstairs. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. Anything you touch that isn't a personal photo will be considered theft of company IP." I stood up. I didn't shake his hand. I didn't look at the photos of my wife or my dog. I picked up my phone, checked the recording, and locked the screen. "10 minutes is more than I need, Julian," I said. "I've been COO here for 6 years. I know exactly where everything is." As I walked past him, I felt the heat of his gaze. He thought he had just saved his buyout. He thought he had outsmarted the old lawyer. He had no idea that by invoking a for-cause termination based on a falsified hardware violation, he had just breached the one contract he should have spent his life reading. Beat 1. The setup: Julian fires Elias for cause to avoid a $7.05 M payout, citing a manufactured technical violation. Beat 2. The conflict: Elias remains calm, gray rock, and reveals he has recorded the interaction, while Julian doubles down on his arrogance. Beat 3. The consequence: Elias leaves without a fight, but with the evidence required to trigger the nuclear option. The hook: Julian thinks the authorization memo he hid is his shield. He doesn't realize Elias has a copy of the original, unalterable server logs. Chapter 2, Gray Rock Rising. The security escort wasn't for protection. It was a performative act of humiliation. 2 men in cheap blazers, likely contractors from a firm Julian's cousin owned, stood behind me as I packed a single cardboard box. The office watched in a silence that tasted like fear. I could see the younger analysts looking away, terrified that catching my eye would mark them for the next restructuring. Julian stood by the glass walls of his corner office, a proprietary grin on his face. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to be dragged out kicking and screaming so he could tell the Bridgepoint investors that I was unstable. I gave him nothing. I moved with the mechanical precision of a man filing a brief. I took my fountain pen, my leather-bound notebook, and a small, antique clock.
I left the company-issued laptop on the desk, its screen locked, its contents already mirrored to a secure, encrypted drive I'd set up months ago when I first smelled Julian's rot. The phone, Thorne, one of the guards said, reaching for the company-issued iPhone on my belt.
I stopped. I turned my head just enough to look at him. This is my personal device. I ported my number over 3 years ago under the Bring Your Own Device policy, Section 4.1. The hardware is registered to my personal account. Touch it, and we move from a civil dispute to a criminal battery charge. Do you want to be the test case for that? The guard looked at Julian. Julian gave a sharp, annoyed nod. I kept the phone. As the elevator doors closed, I didn't look back at the Sterling Vance logo. I looked at the floor numbers ticking down. 14, 12, 10. Every floor was a layer of the company I had helped build, and every floor was a floor I would soon be auditing out of existence. Once in my car, I didn't go home. I drove to a nondescript Starbucks 3 miles away, opened my personal laptop, and connected to a burner hotspot. I wasn't looking for emails. I was looking for the mental map. During my 6 years as COO, I hadn't just managed operations. I had overseen the migration of our entire IP portfolio to the cloud. I knew the architecture of our servers better than the IT director, mostly because I'd written the security protocols myself. Julian thought that by locking my credentials, he had cut me off. He didn't understand that a builder always knows where the secret doors are. I pulled up a document I'd saved to my private cloud months ago, the 2018 acquisition agreement for Sterling Vance. Julian hadn't founded this company. He'd bought into it using his father's hedge fund money, pushing out the original technical founders one by one. I was the last one left who understood the original instruments. I scrolled to page 114. Section 14.4, Technology Transfer and Reversion. Most corporate lawyers skip the boilerplate at the end of a 400-page merger. But I had been the one who insisted on this specific paragraph when Clara Vance was being squeezed. It stated that if the company terminated a senior executive for cause, and that cause was later found to be fraudulent, malicious, or legally insufficient, the rights to the core Vance Thorne compression algorithm, the very tech Bridgepoint was buying, would revert to the original signatories. Me and Clara. Julian thought he was saving $7.5 million. By firing me for cause on a lie, he had just put the $400 million IP portfolio into a legal state of reversionary limbo. I closed my laptop and dialed a number I'd kept in my favorites for 3 years. "Sarah," I said when the voice answered. "It's Elias. The trap just snapped shut. I need the shark." Beat 1, the setup. Elias maintains a gray rock exterior during his public firing, refusing to give Julian the emotional outburst he wants. Beat 2, the conflict. Elias protects his personal hardware from an illegal seizure, asserting his legal rights in real time. Beat 3, the consequence. Elias verifies the existence of the nuclear option, Clause 14.4, and activates his high-level legal ally. The hook. Elias has the mental map of the server, but he needs a forensic specialist to prove Julian tampered with the logs. Chapter 3, the War Room. Sarah Jenkins' office didn't look like a law firm. It looked like a high-end bunker. Located on the 52nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district, it was filled with mid-century modern furniture and the quiet hum of a woman who had never lost a case she cared about.
"He actually did it," Sarah asked, pouring me a glass of sparkling water. She was 50, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could scan a contract for weaknesses faster than an AI. He actually went for the for-cause termination.
"He's greedy, Sarah, and he's desperate," I replied, sitting in a chair that likely cost more than Julian's first car. "The Bridgepoint deal is contingent on a clean balance sheet. He saw my severance as a stain he could wipe away with a few keystrokes."
"He didn't wipe it away," Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He just turned a $7.5 million liability into a $400 million existential threat. Let's look at the contract again.
We spent the next 4 hours dissecting Section 14.4. The language was beautiful in its lethality. It didn't just provide for damages, it triggered an automatic asset reversion.
If a court found Julian had acted in bad faith to avoid a contractual obligation, the patent rights for the Sterling Vance core engine would legally return to me and Clara Vance. The problem is the proof, Sarah noted, tapping her pen against a printed copy of the clause. Julian is going to say the server logs are the truth. He's going to say you accessed that terminal without authorization. If we can't prove he tampered with those logs, Clause 14.4 stays dormant. That's why I brought Marcus, I said.
The door opened, and Marcus, Ghost, Chen walked in. Marcus was 26, wore a hoodie that hadn't been washed in 3 days, and was widely considered the most dangerous forensic analyst in the private sector.
He had been a gray hat hacker I'd hired to test our systems years ago. I'd kept him on a private retainer ever since. I've already looked at the public-facing metadata from the termination filing Julian sent to the SEC for the buyout disclosure, Marcus said, not bothering with a greeting. He opened a ruggedized laptop on Sarah's conference table. He's good. The MAC address change in the logs looks legit at first glance, but he forgot one thing. What? Sarah asked. The cooling fans, Marcus smirked. The off-site lab terminal Elias supposedly used, its internal cooling system is tied to the building's IoT environmental sensors to save power. If Elias had logged in at 11:45 p.m. on Sunday, the lab's temperature sensors would have spiked by 1.5 degrees Celsius as the processor ramped up.
I checked the building's HVAC logs. The lab was at a steady 68 degrees all night. No one was in that system. Sarah looked at me. The logs are forged. They're forged, I confirmed. And Julian committed securities fraud by submitting those forged logs as part of the Bridgepoint due diligence package.
He didn't just try to screw me, he's trying to screw the private equity firm. So, what's the move? Marcus asked, his fingers dancing over the keys. We don't go to the SEC yet, I said.
If we do, they'll freeze the company, and the value will tank before I get my payout. We want the payout and the company. We need to let Julian think he's winning for just a little bit longer. Newton's third law, Sarah whispered.
The more force he applies to the lie, the more the truth will crush him when we pull the rug. Exactly, I said. Sarah, I want you to send a soft demand letter, ask for the severance peacefully, give him a chance to be generous. When he refuses, and he will, he'll be confirming his willful intent. That's when we trigger the audit. Beat 1, the setup. Elias assembles his specialist team, combining Sarah's legal aggression with Marcus's technical forensics. Beat 2, the conflict. The team identifies the fatal flaw in Julian's forgery, a physical discrepancy, temperature that contradicts the digital logs. Beat 3, the consequence. Elias decides on a strategy of calculated passivity, baiting Julian into a harder commitment to his lie. The hook. Julian is about to receive a letter he thinks is a sign of Elias' weakness. He doesn't know it's a legal tether. Chapter 4, the first salvo. 3 days later, the first shot was fired. Not with a cannon, but with a sleek white envelope delivered to Julian's personal assistant by a bonded courier. Sarah's letter was a masterpiece of feigned weakness. It was polite, almost pleading. It suggested that there might have been a misunderstanding regarding the server logs and offered to settle the $7.5 million severance for a mere $5 million if the company acted within 48 hours. I sat in Sarah's office, watching the remote feed from Marcus's observation software. He had managed to gain access to the public-facing reception cameras at Sterling Vance. We watched Julian walk into the lobby, take the envelope from his assistant, and read it.
Even through the grain of the security camera, I could see the exact moment his hubris reached terminal velocity. He laughed. He actually crumpled the letter in his hand and tossed it toward a trash can. He didn't even call his lawyers, Marcus noted, typing rapidly. He just sent an email to the Bridgepoint lead negotiator. He's telling them that the Thorn problem is handled and that I'm begging for pennies. Good, I said. He's documenting his own arrogance.
4 hours later, Julian's response arrived. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a counterstrike. Julian's lawyers, a massive white shoe firm that charged $1,500 an hour, sent a 40-page filing. They were suing me for theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and computer fraud.
They were asking for $50 million in damages and a permanent injunction to prevent me from working in the tech sector for 5 years. He went for the throat, Sarah said, flipping through the filing. He's claiming that your unauthorized access was an attempt to steal the Vance Thorn algorithm to sell it to a competitor. He's using the legal system to intimidate you into silence. He's also doing something else, I noted, pointing to a specific paragraph.
He's swearing under penalty of perjury that the server logs provided in the filing are accurate and unaltered. He just signed his own arrest warrant. He doesn't know we have the HVAC data, Sarah reminded me. To him, he's just using a superior weapon.
But Elias, he's filed for an emergency injunction. We have to go to court on Friday. If the judge grants this, they can seize your personal devices for forensic imaging. Let them, I said. Elias, Sarah looked concerned.
If they get your laptop, they might find our strategy. They won't, I said, because I'm not going to fight the injunction. I'm going to agree to it on one condition. What condition? Mutual discovery, I smiled. If they get to image my devices to look for stolen secrets, I get to image the Sterling Vance primary server to look for exculpatory evidence. It's a standard reciprocal request. No judge will deny it. Julian thought he was using a lawsuit to bury me.
He didn't realize that in the U.S. legal system, a lawsuit is a two-way street. By suing me, he had just given me the legal key to the one room he needed to keep locked, the server room. He'll panic, Sarah said. He'll try to withdraw the suit once he realizes what mutual discovery means.
He can't, I said. Once an emergency injunction is filed and a hearing is set, it's on the record. If he tries to withdraw now, it looks like an admission of guilt to the Bridgepoint investors. He's trapped by his own aggression. Beat 1, the setup. Elias sends a bait letter that Julian mocks, leading Julian to escalate with a massive countersuit. Beat 2. The conflict. Julian attempts to use an emergency injunction to seize Elias' hardware, intending to intimidate him. Beat 3. The consequence. Elias turns the legal tactic against Julian by demanding mutual discovery, gaining legal access to the company's servers. The hook. Julian thinks he can clean the servers before the discovery happens. He doesn't know Marcus is already inside the shadow logs. Chapter 5. The False Victory. The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Julian sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 4 lawyers who looked like they were carved from granite. He wore a navy suit and a look of supreme confidence. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was already a ghost.
Judge Holloway was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who hated corporate grandstanding. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, looking over the filings, "you're asking for an immediate freeze of Mr. Thorne's assets and a forensic imaging of all his personal devices. That's an extraordinary remedy."
You're alleging he stole the Vance Thorn algorithm. Julian stood up, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, Elias Thorne was a trusted executive who turned rogue when he realized his time was up. We have ironclad server logs showing he accessed our most sensitive IP in the dead of night.
We believe he intends to sell this to our competitors to spite the company. Sarah stood up. Your Honor, my client denies these fabrications. However, we are so confident in our innocence that we will consent to the forensic imaging of Mr. Thorne's devices today. The courtroom went silent. Julian's lead lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically to him. They hadn't expected a surrender. However, Sarah continued, her voice gaining steel. Under the principle of reciprocal discovery, we move for the immediate imaging of the Sterling Vance Logmaster server.
We believe those logs have been tampered with to frame my client. We need the raw, unedited metadata to prove his innocence. Julian's face went pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. That's absurd. That server contains our entire IP. We can't just hand the keys to a disgruntled ex-employee.
The imaging will be done by a court-appointed third party, Your Honor, Sarah countered. The data will be held in escrow. Mr. Thorne won't touch it, but the truth will be preserved. Judge Holloway nodded. It seems fair. If you want his data, he gets yours.
I'm granting the mutual injunction. Imaging to begin at 2:00 p.m. today. As we walked out of the courtroom, Julian cornered me in the hallway. His lawyers tried to pull him back, but his hubris was in the driver's seat now. "You think you're smart, Elias," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think some IT nerd is going to find something. I own those servers. I own the people who run them. By the time that third party gets there, there won't be a scrap of evidence that doesn't say you're a thief." I looked at him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I used the gray rock.
Julian, I said calmly, are you admitting in a public hallway that you intend to interfere with a court-ordered forensic audit? He froze. He realized too late that I had my phone in my hand. Not recording, not yet, but the threat was enough.
"I'll see you in the deposition, Elias," he spat, turning on his heel. "I'm going to bury you under so much paperwork you'll forget your own name." 2 hours later, Marcus met me at my house. "He did exactly what you said," Marcus laughed, showing me a screen full of scrolling code.
As soon as he got back to the office, he triggered a global log scrub. He thinks he's deleting the evidence of his forgery. "Did he get it all?" I asked. "He got the primary logs," Marcus said, "but he doesn't know about the Delta Shadow." When I was COO, I installed a redundant read-only backup for the HVAC and server access logs that mirrors to a hidden partition every 10 minutes. It's designed for disaster recovery. He's deleting the official record, but he's leaving the shadow record untouched. "And the best part?" I asked. "The best part," Marcus grinned, "is that the court-appointed auditor is a firm I used to work for. They know exactly where to look for the Delta Shadow. Julian just committed spoliation of evidence, which is a separate crime from the original forgery." Julian just committed spoliation of evidence, which is a separate crime from the original forgery. He's digging a hole, Elias, and he's doing it with a golden shovel. The false victory was complete. Julian thought he had cleaned the crime scene.
In reality, he had just added obstruction of justice to his list of sins. Beat 1. The setup. In court, Elias surprises Julian by consenting to the hardware seizure, provided he gets reciprocal access to the company servers. Beat 2, the conflict. Julian panics and attempts to scrub the servers before the court-ordered audit can take place. Beat 3, the consequence. Julian's attempt to delete evidence is caught by Elias' shadow log system, creating a new, more severe legal violation. The hook. The next step is Julian's deposition. Elias is going to let him lie under oath, knowing he has the shadow logs to prove the perjury. Chapter 6, Dead Ends and Deep Dives. To win a war against a man who owns the servers, you have to find the person who built the foundation. Julian Sterling had erased my access, scrubbed the primary logs, and hired a PR firm to paint me as a disgruntled relic. He was operating on the assumption that the company's history began the day his father's check cleared. He was wrong. I spent Thursday night in a secure rental in the hills of Vermont, far from the subpoena servers Julian had likely dispatched to my home.
Marcus was with me, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at the Delta Shadow logs. "Elias, we have the HVAC data and the shadow access records," Marcus said, rubbing his temples. "It's enough to prove the logs were faked. But it's not enough to trigger Clause 14.4. To get the asset reversion, we don't just need to prove he lied. We need to prove he breached the original security protocols defined in the founding charter." "The root authority protocols," I whispered. "Exactly. Julian changed the administrative passwords, but the foundation of Sterling Vance Tech is built on a dual-key system. One key was held by the COO, me, the other was held by the founder." "Clara Vance," Marcus said, "but she's been off the grid for 2 years. The rumor was she took her exit payout and moved to a compound in the Alps to escape Julian's lawyers."
Julian had made Clara's life a living hell during her exit. He'd buried her in non-competes, sued her for improper use of company assets for a charity she'd started, and eventually forced her to sign a global gag order. He thought he'd bought her silence. He didn't realize that in the world of cold justice, silence isn't an ending, it's a gathering of energy. I didn't call Clara. I knew Julian monitored her public-facing communications. Instead, I used a protocol we'd established in 2018. I sent a $1 transaction to her old, dormant PayPal account with a specific string of hex code in the Note section. 3 hours later, a burner phone on the table vibrated.
Elia's, the voice was tired but sharp. Clara Vance didn't do small talk. I saw the SEC filing. He's using the for-cause loophole on you. He's trying, Clara, but he's overreached. I have Marcus Chen. We have the Delta Shadow. That's a good start, Clara said. But you need the hardware token, don't you? The one from the original 2016 server build. The one Julian thinks I destroyed when I signed the NDA. He told the board you lost it in a house fire. Clara laughed, a dry, cynical sound. Julian wouldn't know a hardware token if it was encrypted into his morning latte. I have the token, Elias. And I have something else. I kept the original, handwritten notes from our first architecture meeting. The ones Julian tried to subpoena but couldn't find because I'd hidden them in my mother's safety deposit box.
The notes prove the for-cause hardware violation is a physical impossibility, I said. Because the secure terminal Julian claims I used wasn't even connected to the M&A database in the original build.
Precisely, Clara said. I'm sending you a location. Meet me there in 6 hours. Bring a lawyer who isn't afraid of a billionaire's tantrum. I looked at Marcus. The dead end had opened into a tunnel.
Julian had spent 2 years trying to erase Clara Vance. He was about to find out that you can't erase a founder. You can only make them an enemy. Beat 1, the setup, Elias and Marcus realize that proving forgery is not enough. Beat 2, the conflict, Elias has to bypass Julian's surveillance to contact the exiled, Clara Vance, who has been silenced by a global gag order. Beat 3, the consequence, Clara reveals she still possesses the hardware token. The hook, Julian is currently bragging to the Bridgepoint investors about his unassailable evidence. He doesn't know Elias is currently meeting the woman who can prove the evidence doesn't exist. Chapter 7, Newton's Third Law. Julian Sterling wasn't content with just firing me. He needed to destroy the Elias Thorne brand. By Monday, the Whisper campaign had turned into a shout. TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal received anonymous leaks suggesting that my departure was linked to a massive data breach I'd personally orchestrated. The articles were carefully worded to avoid direct libel.
Julian was using the social front to devalue my reputation, making it impossible for me to find a new role or secure backing for a countersuit. He's applying maximum pressure, Sarah Jenkins said.
He wants you to settle. He wants you to take a $500K shut-up check and sign a confession. He's forgotten Newton's third law, I said, sipping my coffee. To every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. He's pushing, now we pull. What's the pull? We're not going to fight the trade secrets case yet, I said. That's what he expects. Instead, we're filing a separate, aggressive lawsuit today.
A defamation and tortious interference claim against Julian Sterling personally, not the company. Sarah's eyes lit up. If we sue him personally, the company's D&O insurance might not cover his legal defense. But more importantly, it gives us expedited discovery on his personal devices. In a defamation case where a CEO is suspected of leaking, the court allows us to see his private text messages and Slack logs.
No corporate privacy shield can stop that. By 2:00 p.m., Julian was served. Not at his office, but at a high-profile industry lunch where he was trying to charm the Bridgepoint lead negotiator. Sarah had the process server deliver the papers right as the appetizers arrived. Julian's reaction was exactly what I wanted. He lost his gray rock composure. He stood up, shouted at the server, and threw a glass of wine. The Bridgepoint negotiator looked horrified. Within 2 hours, Julian was back in his office, frantically texting his PR team and his mistress. He thought he was safe because he was using an encrypted messaging app.
He didn't realize that Marcus Chen had already flagged the specific metadata signatures of that app during the reciprocal discovery imaging. He's panicking, Marcus said, monitoring the server's traffic. He just sent a message to a guy named Vince. The message says, "The HVAC logs are gone, right? Tell me they're gone." Vince is the facility's manager, I said. Julian just documented his own attempt at spoliation. And there's more, Marcus said. He just sent a text to a reporter at the Journal. He's offering them exclusive access to my personnel file if they run a story about my unstable mental health.
Julian was doubling down on the social front. He was so blinded by his need to win the public narrative that he was handing us the smoking gun for his personal liability. "Sarah," I called her on the secure line. "He's taking the bait. File for the emergency discovery order based on the wine-throwing incident as proof of erratic behavior. We need those texts in the record by tomorrow." The spring was being compressed. Julian thought he was winning the press. He didn't realize he was losing the law. Beat 1. The setup, Julian attempts to destroy Elia's reputation through leaked smears. Beat 2. The conflict, Elia's counters with a personal suit. Beat 3. The consequence, Julian's panicked communications provide direct evidence of his attempt to destroy HVAC logs. The hook, Julian's texts mention a loophole memo he sent to the board. Chapter 8, the trump card. The loophole memo was the stuff of corporate legend, a document so arrogant, so legally reckless that it shouldn't have existed. But Julian Sterling believed he was the smartest person in any room, which meant he felt the need to explain his brilliance to his peers. Thanks to the expedited discovery order Sarah had secured, Julian's personal email archive was now being indexed by Marcus.
I found it, Marcus said at 3:00 a.m. on Wednesday. It wasn't an email. It was a PDF attachment hidden in a folder labeled Furniture Invoices. It's a 5-page strategy document Julian sent to his father and 2 key board members 3 months ago.
I leaned in. The title of the document was Project Clean Slate, Optimizing Exit Valuation Through Liability Reduction. I read the executive summary. Julian had explicitly outlined a plan to terminate legacy high-salary employees using manufactured handbook violations, to save the company over $30 million in combined severance and equity payouts before the Bridgepoint buyout. The memo even listed me by name. Thorne, COO, high severance liability, plan, document a technical breach using the off-site lab terminal, establish for cause termination by Q3. He wrote it down, I whispered, almost in disbelief.
He literally wrote a roadmap of his own fraud. He didn't think anyone would ever see it, Sarah said, joining us in the bunker via video link. Under attorney-client privilege, he thought this was safe. But he didn't send it to a lawyer. He sent it to his dad and a couple of buddies on the board. The privilege is void. This isn't just a contract breach anymore, I said. This is a criminal conspiracy to commit securities fraud.
He's lying to Bridgepoint about the company's true liabilities. We have everything now, Sarah said, her voice vibrating with professional satisfaction.
The HVAC logs prove the terminal wasn't used. The shadow logs prove he tried to delete the evidence. The hardware token from Clara proves the terminal couldn't even access the data. And now, the loophole memo proves it was all premeditated.
Wait, Marcus said, looking at a new stream of data. Julian just realized the discovery order went through. He's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. He's going to try to push the Bridgepoint deal through early, closing it tomorrow afternoon. He thinks if he closes the deal, the company becomes Bridgepoint's problem and his personal liability disappears into the merger, I said.
He's wrong, Sarah said. Bridgepoint has a material adverse change clause. If we drop this on them now, they'll walk away, and Julian will be left with a bankrupt company and a dozen lawsuits.
No, I said, standing up. If we just blow the deal, the company dies and 400 employees lose their jobs because of Julian's ego. I helped build this place. I don't want it dead. I want it cleansed. So what's the move? Marcus asked. We don't go to the press. We don't go to the SEC. Not yet, I said. We're going to that board meeting not as plaintiffs but as the new owners of the IP. Clause 14.4, Sarah smiled. The nuclear option. It's time to launch, I said. Beat 1, the setup discovery reveals a loophole memo where Julian explicitly planned the fraudulent firing. Beat 2, the conflict, Julian attempts to accelerate the $400 M buyout. Beat 3, The consequence, Elias decides to use Clause 14.4. The hook, the board meeting starts in 5 hours. Julian has security at the door. Elias has the hardware token that shuts the whole system down. Chapter 9, The Nuclear Option. The Sterling Vance boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel overlooking a city that Julian Sterling thought he owned. When I arrived at 8:55 a.m., the security team blocked the entrance.
Mr. Thorne, you are not authorized to be on the premises, the lead guard said, his hand moving toward his belt. Actually, Sarah Jenkins said, stepping forward with a sheaf of court-stamped documents.
Under the emergency order granted by Judge Holloway at 7:00 a.m. this morning, Mr. Thorne is appearing as a material witness and a claimant of interest. If you block him, you're in contempt of court. Move.
They moved. I walked into the room. Julian was at the head of the table, surrounded by his board and the lead negotiator from Bridgepoint, a man named Henderson. Julian looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was loose. "Elias," Julian sneered, his voice cracking.
You're just in time to watch the vote. We're closing the deal in 20 minutes. Your little lawsuit is going to be buried under $4 billion of private equity.
"The deal is dead, Julian," I said, my voice steady, my gray rock mode absolute. "And you're about to be removed for gross misconduct." Henderson from Bridgepoint looked up. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne, we've reviewed the for cause termination."
Mr. Sterling has assured us it's ironclad. Julian lied to you, Mr. Henderson, I said. I placed a ruggedized tablet on the table and turned it toward the board. This is the loophole memo.
In it, Julian Sterling outlines how he intended to defraud Bridgepoint by manufacturing evidence against me to reduce company liabilities. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like it had mass. Julian's father, an older man with a face like a hawk, snatched the tablet. His face went gray as he read his son's words. "But that's not the nuclear option," I continued. Under Section 14.4 of the 2018 Acquisition Agreement, a document none of you apparently bothered to read, a for-cause termination found to be fraudulent triggers an immediate and irrevocable asset reversion. I pulled the hardware token Clara Vance had given me from my pocket and placed it on the table. "This is the root authority token for the Vance-Thorne compression algorithm," I said. As of 9:02 a.m. this morning, because the company breached my contract through fraud, the patent rights for your core technology have reverted to me and Clara Vance. Sterling Vance Tech no longer owns the IP Bridgepoint is trying to buy.
Henderson stood up, his face pale. Wait, you're saying this company has no assets? Julian surged forward, reaching for the token. You're lying, you stole that, I'll have you arrested.
"Sit down, Julian," his father said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He looked at Henderson. "The deal is off. We need a moment with our CEO." "The deal isn't just off," Henderson spat, gathering his papers.
Bridgepoint will be suing Sterling Vance for the $20 million in due diligence costs we've already sunk into this fraud. See you in court, Julian. As the Bridgepoint team stormed out, Julian collapsed into his chair.
He looked at me, his eyes full of a childish, bewildered rage. "You ruined it," he whispered. "You ruined everything for $7 million. "No, Julian," I said. "I didn't do it for the money."
"I didn't do it for the money, I did it because you broke the system. I just put the pieces back where they belong." Beat 1, the setup, Elias crashes the final board meeting. Beat 2, the conflict, Elias triggers Clause 14.4. Beat 3, the consequence, the investors flee, the deal collapses. The hook, the company is bankrupt. Julian is about to be fired, but Elias has one more move to make sure Julian never works in tech again. Chapter 10, Scorched Earth. The aftermath of a nuclear option isn't an explosion, it's a cold, silent fallout. Within 48 hours of the board meeting, Sterling Vance Tech was in freefall. The board, led by Julian's own father, voted unanimously to terminate Julian for gross misconduct and fiduciary breach. Because he was fired for cause, his own equity was clawed back. And his exit package was liquidated to pay for the impending Bridgepoint lawsuit. I sat in my home office, watching the news. Julian was being escorted from the building by the same security guards he'd once turned on me. There were no cameras inside, but someone had leaked a cell phone video of him crying in the lobby. He looked small. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his tailored suits couldn't protect him from the fine print.
Sarah Jenkins called me that afternoon. The settlement is finalized, Elias. The board has agreed to pay you the full $7.5 million severance plus $10 million in special damages to avoid the reversionary IP lawsuit.
They want the patents back. And Clara, I asked. Clara is being reinstated as chairwoman. She's taking over the company. She's already reached out to Bridgepoint. They're willing to come back to the table.
But only if you and Clara are at the helm. They've offered you the CEO position. I don't want to be CEO, Sarah, I said. I'm retired. I just want the system to work. Well, it worked, she said. Julian is officially bankrupt. His father has cut him off, and the SEC just opened a formal investigation into the loophole memo. He'll be lucky if he avoids federal prison for securities fraud.
I hung up and looked at a letter on my desk. It was from Julian. It wasn't a threat. It was a rambling, 3-page apology begging me to call off the SEC. He talked about his vision, his legacy, and how he was just trying to do what was best. I didn't read past the first page. I walked over to my shredder and fed it through. A week later, I met Clara Vance at a small cafe near the original lab. She looked 10 years younger.
We did it, Elias, she said, holding up a glass of iced tea. The board is purged. Julian is a pariah. And the company is actually making a profit because we've cut the vanity projects he was using to hide his losses.
What's next for you? I asked. Running the show the right way, no loopholes, just good code and better contracts, she smiled. And you, are you really going to stay retired? I have a lot of books to read, I said, and I've been thinking about starting a consulting firm, one that specializes in contractual forensics. There are a lot of Julians out there, Clara. And most of them haven't read their own section 14.4. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the last 6 years lift. I hadn't used luck. I hadn't used a gotcha moment. I had simply waited for an arrogant man to trip over the rules he thought were beneath him. Julian Sterling had tried to use a loophole to fire me without severance. I had used the nuclear option clause in my contract he didn't bother reading. Justice wasn't hot. It wasn't loud. It was a 400-page document, a hardware token, and a man who knew how to wait. The case was closed. Beat 1, the setup, Julian is fired for actual gross misconduct. Beat 2, the conflict, Elias receives a desperate apology but maintains his gray rock stance. Beat 3, the consequence, Clara Vance takes over the company, Elias receives his payout, and he decides to start a firm. The resolution. Elias Thorne lives a life of quiet luxury and strategic consulting, a master of the cold justice world where the fine print is the ultimate weapon. Lesson title: The Cold Justice Manifesto, Strategic Lessons in Corporate Survival. The saga of Elias Thorne and Julian Sterling is more than a tale of corporate revenge. It is a case study in systemic warfare. In Western professional environments, the person who screams the loudest usually loses. The person who understands the rules and how they intersect with human hubris wins. Below are the core methodologies extracted from this case, designed to provide value to any professional navigating a high-stakes environment. 1. The psychology of the gray rock. The method: when confronted with an aggressive, narcissistic, or entitled opponent, the protagonist adopts the persona of a gray rock, boring, non-reactive, and entirely focused on data. The lesson: starve the narcissist. Antagonists feed on emotional reactions. They use your anger or fear to paint you as unstable. By remaining neutral, you force the antagonist to escalate to get a reaction. The escalation trap. When an opponent escalates because you aren't reacting, they often overreach and commit a material violation. Their dynamic aggression makes your static calm look like the pinnacle of professional competence. 2. The victory equation. In cold justice, success is calculated, not stumbled upon. The formula used throughout the story is victory equals material violation plus binding evidence multiplied by hubris divided by patience. Material violation: don't fight over feelings. Fight over breaches of contract, wage theft, or fraud. Binding evidence, an email is better than a memory. A time-stamped log is better than an email. Hubris, arrogance causes people to leave a paper trail because they believe no one is smart enough to find it. Patience. The longer you wait to strike, the more evidence the opponent generates. 3. The power of reciprocal discovery. The method. Elias used Julian's own aggression against him. When Julian sued for theft of trade secrets, Elias didn't just defend. He used the legal right of discovery to look into Julian's servers. The lesson, the double-edged sword. In the US, UK legal systems, if someone opens a door to investigate you, you often gain the right to investigate them. Leverage the lawsuit. If a toxic boss threatens legal action, they are essentially handing you a subpoena power. 4. Clause 14.4. Finding your nuclear option. The method. The turning point was a specific, overlooked clause in an old contract, the technology transfer and reversion clause. The lesson, master the original instruments. Most people only read the summary of their employment agreements. The nuclear option is usually hidden in the boilerplate, indemnification clauses, IP reversion, or narrow definitions. 5. The shadow log strategy. The method. Elias knew primary logs could be scrubbed, so he relied on redundant systems, HVAC temperature sensors, and hidden partitions. The lesson, information asymmetry. Always have a source of truth that the opponent doesn't know about. Forensic competence is the ultimate counter to corporate gaslighting. Summary for the reader. If you find yourself in a nuclear clause scenario, remember, 1. Document everything in real time. 2. Never interrupt your enemy while they are making a mistake. 3. The system is the weapon, you are merely the operator. 4. Competence is the best defense. Julian lost because he thought he was above the rules. Elias won because he lived by them.